I was just a single mom delivery girl, yet the Millionaire CEO rejected 8 models and chose me. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I woke up before the sun that day, just like I always do. The city outside my tiny apartment was still quiet, but inside, my heart was already racing, filled with the endless thoughts that never seemed to stop. My little girl was still asleep, her soft breathing echoing in the small room, and for a moment, I just watched her, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her tiny hand curled around her blanket. I kissed her forehead, whispered the promises I hoped I could keep, and grabbed my bag. Another day of deliveries awaited. Another day of being invisible to the world, yet trying to show up anyway. I stepped into the streets, carrying not just parcels, but the weight of life itself. Every corner, every door, every glance reminded me that this world wasn't built for someone like me. I wasn't glamorous. I wasn't rich. I wasn't the kind of person anyone paused to notice. And yet, I kept moving, because I had to. For my daughter, for the life I wanted to give her, for the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone might actually see me. The streets were familiar, each crack in the sidewalk telling me the same story it always had: struggle, survival, and a relentless grind. I passed people in suits, people laughing, people who had the kind of comfort I had never known. They didn't look at me, not really. Their eyes skimmed past, registering nothing more than a delivery uniform and a package in my hand. And yet, for some reason I couldn't explain, I felt a presence that day, a sensation like someone was watching, studying every move I made. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake it off. Later, when I entered one of the taller buildings downtown, carrying a bundle of packages, I felt it again. The weight of judgment, sharper and colder this time. People glanced, some with polite smiles, others with barely hidden disdain. Their eyes measured me, labeled me, dismissed me. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I felt it all the same, in the tightening of my chest, the quickening of my steps. I wondered, not for the first time, why a world so full of people could so easily overlook someone just trying to survive. And then I saw him. I couldn't take my eyes off him at first, though I tried. He was impossibly poised, impossibly powerful, the kind of man who could have anyone, anything, at the snap of a finger. I had seen him in magazines, on the news, in gossip columns. A millionaire CEO, surrounded by beauty, surrounded by influence, surrounded by perfection. And yet, for reasons I didn't understand, his gaze found me. He wasn't cold or dismissive, and he wasn't smiling with shallow interest. He was staring, intently, as if he were trying to see something beneath the surface, something invisible to everyone else. I froze for a second, unsure if I should move, unsure if this attention was real or just some trick of my mind. My heart pounded, my palms grew sweaty, and I felt exposed in a way I hadn't felt in years. All my walls, all my carefully built defenses, threatened to crumble under the intensity of his stare. I had spent my life being careful, being small, being unnoticed, and suddenly, all of that seemed impossible. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a man who had everything: money, power, influence. Yet he was captivated by someone who had nothing but grit, perseverance, and a daily struggle for dignity. He had rejected models, women the world considered perfect, and yet he lingered on me. I didn't understand it. I still don't fully. But the pull of it was undeniable. It was frightening. It was thrilling. It was everything I had never allowed myself to feel before. I tried to shake off the feeling as I continued with my deliveries, moving through the city like a ghost, unnoticed by most, yet subtly marked by him. And all the while, I won. Derrid, why me? What did he see that everyone else didn't? Was it my perseverance, my exhaustion, my quiet defiance in the face of a world that refused to care? Or was it something else entirely? Something raw and undeniable that had nothing to do with wealth, beauty, or status? Every step that day was heavier than the last. Not because of the packages I carried, but because of the questions swirling in my mind. Every glance, every whispered judgment from strangers, every moment I felt invisible, sharpened the tension inside me. I had lived my life quietly, surviving, barely noticed, barely acknowledged. And yet, in that lobby, in that fleeting, impossible moment, everything changed. And I didn't know it yet. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would challenge everything I thought I knew about life, about people, about power, and about myself. I had no idea that the world I had walked through every day, unnoticed and dismissed, was about to collide with a world so different it almost seemed unreal. And in that collision, nothing would ever be the same. The next few days felt like walking through a haze. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, over and over. The way he looked at me, not like anyone else had ever looked, but with an intensity that made my chest ache. I went about my deliveries as usual, my hands gripping packages, my mind elsewhere, wondering if I had imagined it all. Maybe I had. Maybe a man like him didn't notice someone like me. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. There was something there. Something I couldn't name. Something that made my heart race and my stomach twist. I tried to focus on work. Tried to keep my life as small and quiet as it had always been. But it was impossible. Every corner I turned, every lobby I entered, I found myself scanning the crowd, wondering if he would appear again. And sometimes, he did. I would catch glimpses of him in a building hallway, across the street, even in a reflection as I delivered a package. Each time, my heart jumped, and with it came a fear that I couldn't shake. The fear of being exposed, of being judged, of having my life laid bare to someone who could destroy it with a word. The city didn't care about me, not really. People hurried past, their eyes avoiding mine, their minds too full of their own lives to notice the struggle that clung to me like a second skin. I felt the weight of their indifference, the quiet, daily injustice that followed me everywhere. Every misstep, every tired glance, every scrapped hand or smudged uniform reminded me that I was invisible, that the world had no space for someone like me. And yet, in the midst of that, he was different. He saw me. Not for what I lacked, not for what society told him I should be, but for something I couldn't even articulate. It was on one particularly hot afternoon that everything escalated. I had spent hours under the sun, sweat dripping down my back, the straps of my bag cutting into my shoulders. I was delivering to a high-rise downtown, a building that always felt cold and unwelcoming. As I stepped into the lobby, I felt the familiar weight of stares, the same thinly veiled contempt, and I prepared myself to shrink into the background as usual. But then, there he was, standing in the center of the room, watching. My pulse raced. I wanted to turn, to run, to hide behind the packages I carried, but my legs didn't move. Something inside me, something I didn't understand, kept me rooted in place. And then the whispers started. Not about him, not about the luxury surrounding him, but about me. Murmurs from employees, security guards, even some of the clients. Comments about my uniform, about my tired eyes, about how someone like me even had the audacity to be in this space. I felt the familiar sting of injustice, that silent, suffocating reminder that the world had already decided my place. And yet, he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't listen. His eyes never left mine. In that moment, I felt something shift, like the world had tilted ever so slightly, and I was standing on the edge of something enormous and terrifying. I realized then that this wasn't just about me being ignored or dismissed anymore. This was about being recognized, truly seen in a way that could change everything or destroy it all. I tried to push the thought away, told myself I couldn't get attached, that this was impossible, that someone like him would never care about someone like me. But the pull was undeniable. Every glance, every subtle nod of acknowledgement, every fraction of a second he held my gaze, felt like a lifeline in a world that had long told me I didn't matter. And I couldn't stop thinking about what it meant, about what this attention might bring. Then came the moment that truly broke me, the moment that tested everything I had endured and everything I believed about myself. A senior employee, a man I had seen countless times before, stepped forward, his eyes full of judgment. His words weren't loud, but they carried the kind of weight that crushed silently, the kind of power that reminded me of my place. Comments about how someone like me didn't belong here, about my station, about how I should know my limits. My face burned, my hands shook, and I felt the familiar rage and despair that I had carried all my life. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, to run back to the streets where I was invisible. But I didn't, because he was still watching. His gaze was unwavering, unshakable, almost protective, and in it I found a strange, fragile courage. In that moment, I realized that no amount of judgment, no whisper, no sneer could take away the truth of who I was, the resilience, the struggle, the strength that had carried me this far. And maybe, just maybe, someone could see that strength, could recognize it, and it could matter. That day ended with me walking out of that lobby, my body trembling, my mind spinning, but something had shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore, not entirely, and though the world round me still whispered its disdain, I had felt something rare, something extraordinary, an acknowledgement that defied the rules the world had set for me. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning. Because nothing in my life had prepared me for what was coming next. The collision between my world and his was inevitable, and it was going to test everything I thought I knew about courage, about injustice, about love, and about the power of being truly seen. The days ahead would bring challenges I could not imagine, and choices that would demand every ounce of strength I had ever known. I didn't know it yet, but I was standing at the edge of a moment that could change my life forever, and nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The days that followed felt like a tightrope stretched across two worlds, and I was walking it barefoot. Every morning, I woke up to the same struggle, my daughter's soft breathing, the small apartment that smelled faintly of last night's dinner, the lingering fatigue from a life spent constantly moving just to stay in place. I kissed her forehead, whispered the promises I tried to believe in, and stepped back into the streets, carrying more than parcels. I carried the weight of being seen in a world that often refused to look, and the strange, disorienting pull of someone noticing me in a way that made my heart ache. It began subtly at first, a glance here, a nod there, the briefest acknowledgement that I existed beyond the uniform, the packages, the daily grind. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Every time I caught his gaze, the CEO's piercing, unwavering stare, it felt like an electric shock that left my entire body trembling. I couldn't understand it, and yet I couldn't escape it. The city's noise, the endless hum of traffic and chatter, faded when he was near, leaving only the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and relentless. But recognition came with a price. Not everyone welcomed the attention. The more I felt his presence, the more I noticed the judgment of others. Colleagues in corporate buildings whispered behind doors, their polite smiles masking suspicion or disdain. Security guards followed me with just enough attention to make me uncomfortable. I heard snide remarks, barely above a whisper, about someone like me daring to be noticed, daring to exist in spaces where I didn't belong. I could feel their eyes on me as I delivered packages, the silent questioning of my worth gnawing at me with every step. Then came the day that pushed me to my limits. I was delivering to one of the tallest, most prestigious buildings downtown, carrying a bundle heavier than usual, my hands raw from the straps of my bag. The lobby was pristine, cold and impersonal, filled with polished floors and people who wore success like armor. And there he was, waiting. Not by accident, I knew, because nothing about this felt accidental. He watched me approach, not with arrogance, but with an intensity that made me tremble. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and in that moment, every ounce of insecurity I had carried for years threatened to surface. As I handed over the packages, the whispers started again. A man in a suit leaned slightly toward a colleague, voice low but sharp enough for me to hear. Comments about who she thought she was, about how someone like her even dared to step in here. My face burned. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to shrink into myself and vanish from their sight. Every day, every moment, this was the world I had known. Silent judgment, unspoken rules, invisible barriers. But now it felt sharper, more real, more suffocating. And yet, he remained, unwavering. His gaze didn't falter, didn't judge, didn't mock. It was as if he could see through everything. The uniform, the dirt on my hands, the exhaustion etched into my face, and see the truth beneath it all. For the first time, I realized that someone could acknowledge my struggle without dismissing it. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly confusing all at once. I didn't know what it meant, only that it changed something inside me, something I had long buried beneath survival and routine. The tension escalated in ways I hadn't expected. Colleagues tried to intervene, subtle but unmistakable, their words veiled as concern or advice, warning me to keep my distance, to know my place. And still, I felt drawn forward, propelled by a strange, unspoken connection, by a pull I couldn't explain and didn't fully understand. It was as if this man, with all his wealth, power, and influence, had opened a window in my life, a window I didn't know existed, and one I was terrified to step through. I began to notice other things too. The way he lingered at the office doors I delivered to, the subtle gestures, small but deliberate, that set him apart from the judgmental eyes surrounding me. A brief smile, a nod, a look that lingered just long enough to make my pulse spike and my thoughts spin out of control. Every day, the stakes grew higher. Every glance carried meaning. Every interaction felt loaded with unspoken consequences. I couldn't tell anyone about it, couldn't explain the way my body reacted or how my mind raced at the mere thought of seeing him. And then, there was the moment that made everything impossible to ignore. A confrontation, subtle but unavoidable, where a man with authority, the kind that could ruin you with a word, stepped between us. His tone was calm, professional, but his message was clear. Someone like me was out of place here. My face burned, my throat tightened, and my hands shook. I wanted to retreat, to vanish into the familiar streets that didn't care whether I existed or not. But I didn't, because his eyes found mine, unwavering, and in that gaze, I found courage I didn't know I possessed. I realized, in that moment, that being seen, truly seen, could hurt as much as it could heal. That recognition could be terrifying, especially in a world built to dismiss people like me. But it was also a lifeline, and I understood, deep in my bones, that nothing about my life would ever be the same again. This wasn't just about packages or buildings, about wealth or status. It was about courage, resilience, and the quiet defiance of a world that constantly tried to ignore me. As I stepped out of the lobby that day, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had faced judgment, scrutiny, and quiet hostility, and yet, something extraordinary had happened. I had been acknowledged. I had been seen. And though the road ahead was uncertain, though the world remained harsh and unforgiving, I knew that I had glimpsed the possibility of something real, something that transcended the invisible barriers I had always faced. And I also knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that this was only the beginning. Because life, as I had always known it, was about to collide with a world so different it was almost unimaginable. And the consequences, whether good or terrible, were inevitable. It was a day that started like any other, but from the moment I stepped into the lobby, I felt the air shift, heavy and electric, like the city itself was holding its breath. The packages in my arms suddenly felt heavier, my hands shaking despite the grip I forced on them. I had delivered to this building countless times, but this day was different. The familiar hum of air conditioning and elevator dings became a backdrop for a tension I could feel in every nerve, a weight that pressed down on my chest and made my pulse thunder in my ears. And then I saw him, standing there in the center of the lobby, as if waiting for me. His gaze found mine immediately, intense and unwavering. It wasn't a casual look, not a polite acknowledgement. It was sharp, searching, as though he were trying to see through everything I carried, the exhaustion, the struggle, the small, ordinary life that no one else even noticed, and I felt exposed in a way that made my stomach twist and my legs want to buckle. Before I could move, the whispers began. Not soft, not distant, but directed at me. Comments about my uniform, about my tired eyes, about how someone like me even dared to step into this space. Their words weren't loud, but they carried the kind of weight that sinks into your chest and makes every muscle tense. I felt all the humiliation I had ever endured in a single moment, the injustice of a world that constantly reminded me of my place. But he didn't flinch. He didn't turn away. He didn't whisper or mock. His eyes stayed on me, steady and unwavering. And in that gaze, I felt a strange, fragile courage rise up. I realized then that this moment demanded something I hadn't expected. I had to hold my ground. I had to face their judgment, their contempt, their invisible chains, and not let them define me. The tension escalated when one of the senior employees stepped forward, his presence authoritative, his words carefully measured. "You shouldn't be here," he said, almost softly, but with an unmistakable edge. "This isn't your place." The words struck like a blow, and I felt my chest tighten, my throat burning. My first instinct was to shrink, to disappear into the shadow of the lobby, to retreat to the streets where I was invisible and safe. But then his eyes met mine again, unwavering, and I realized something powerful. This wasn't about the building, or the packages, or even him. This was about me, about standing tall in a world that constantly told me I didn't belong. Every ounce of fear, every thread of exhaustion, every moment I had endured, the silent judgment, the whispers, the daily dismissals, rushed through me. I felt anger, despair, and something more. A defiant strength that demanded to be seen. And in that heartbeat, I understood that I could not, would not, be resagriti, reduced to what society said I was. I had fought too hard, carried too much, survived too long to let a moment like this crush me. The room seemed to tilt, time slowing as I held his gaze, and for a brief, fragile second, it felt like nothing else mattered. The whispers, the judgment, the weight of invisible barriers, they all faded. It was just him, and me, and the recognition of something raw and undeniable. And I realized then that this connection, this acknowledgement, was more dangerous, more thrilling, more transformative than anything I had ever imagined. But the climax wasn't over. Just as I began to feel that strange hope rising, another presence made itself felt. A supervisor, someone who could have easily ruined the fragile moment. His voice, sharp and calm, cut through the charged air. "Step back. This isn't appropriate." My face burned, my hands shook, and I felt all the vulnerability of a lifetime compressed into one moment. The world was ready to pull me back into its rigid rules, to remind me that someone like me could never fully belong here. And yet, I didn't move. I couldn't. Something inside me had shifted. Something powerful, a quiet fire that refused to be extinguished by judgment or contempt. I had been invisible for so long, dismissed and ignored, and yet here, in this improbable collision of worlds, I found the courage to stand, to face them all, to claim a space in a world that had never wanted me. The CEO's gaze never wavered. It held me, steadied me, and in that look, I understood more than words could convey. Recognition, respect, fascination, not for my looks, not for my charm, but for the endurance, the raw honesty, the courage it took just to exist in a world that wanted me small. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Being seen could hurt as much as it could heal, and I had never known anything so terrifying or so liberating in my entire life. I stepped back, lifted the packages, and moved toward the elevator, my body trembling with adrenaline and relief. Every whispered word, every judgmental glance, every ounce of injustice I had endured seemed distant now, eclipsed by the intensity of that brief, impossible moment, and I knew, deep in my bones, that life would never be the same again. As the elevator doors closed, the city outside seemed to wait, holding its breath along with me. I had faced the worst of judgment, the weight of silent contempt, and yet something extraordinary had happened. I had been seen, I had been recognized, and though the future was uncertain, though the world remained harsh and unforgiving, I knew that the collision of our worlds, the ordinary and the extraordinary, was only beginning. And so I asked myself, as I stepped back into the streets, could one moment, one act of recognition, truly change the course of a life? And if it could, was I ready to embrace it, with all its risk and its promise? The days after that moment felt surreal, like I was walking through life with one foot in my old world and one foot in a new, unfamiliar one. The city around me hadn't changed, not really. The streets were still crowded, the buildings still cold and indifferent. But something inside me had shifted. I had been seen in a way I never thought possible, recognized not for what I lacked, not for my uniform or my exhaustion, but for something real, raw, and undeniable. And that recognition had changed me. I went back to my deliveries, the familiar rhythm of the streets, the hum of traffic, the endless weight of responsibility. But the ordinary felt different now. Every glance that had once cut me down, every whispered judgment, every moment where I felt invisible, now existed in contrast to that extraordinary moment of acknowledgement. I carried it with me like a fragile shield, a reminder that someone could see me for who I truly was, even in a world determined not to. Yet the struggle remained. Life didn't suddenly become easy. People still whispered. People still judged. People still assumed that someone like me had no right to occupy spaces that were not made for me. And every day, I had to confront that reality, to hold my head high while the world tried to diminish me. But I had learned something powerful. Their judgment could not define my worth. My perseverance, my courage, my ability to keep moving in a world that constantly tried to ignore me, that was mine, and no one could take it away. For him, the collision of our worlds was equally transformative. The man who had wealth, influence, and power discovered that those things could not teach empathy, could not make him see what really mattered. He learned that resilience and authenticity, the quiet strength forged in the fires of struggle, were far more compelling than beauty or perfection. And in seeing me, he confronted his own assumptions, his own judgments, and perhaps, for the first time, understood what it truly meant to see someone without the filter of society's expectations. Our worlds had collided in a way that was impossible to ignore. And though life would continue to challenge us, though the world would still weigh heavily with injustice, that moment of connection remained. A reminder that courage and recognition could pierce through even the thickest walls. It reminded me that value is not defined by wealth, appearance, or status, but by resilience, humanity, and the unyielding strength to face a world that often refuses to see you. As I walked home one evening, my daughter asleep in my arms, I reflected on all of it. The judgment, the whispers, the fear, the courage, the rare, transformative gaze of someone who truly saw me. And I asked myself, quietly but fiercely, how many lives go unnoticed every single day? How many struggles remain invisible? How many stories, like mine, are overlooked simply because the world has decided who deserves attention and who does not? This wasn't just my story. It was the story of countless people, dismissed and judged, overlooked and undervalued. They're living in the shadows of society's assumptions. And perhaps that's the lesson I had been given, the takeaway that no one could ever take away, that recognition, empathy, and courage matter. That being seen can change everything, even if it comes with fear, risk, and uncertainty. And so I keep moving, carrying both my daughter and the lessons of that day with me, aware of the harshness of the world, but also aware of its possibility. I carry the understanding that courage is not only about surviving, but about claiming your space, being visible even when the world tells you to hide, and trusting that sometimes someone will notice the truth beneath the surface. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if that recognition will grow into something lasting, or if it will fade under the weight of the world's expectations. But I do know this. Being seen changed me. It made me braver, more resilient, more certain that my worth is not defined by whispers, judgments, or societal boundaries. And I ask you, how many lives pass by unnoticed every day? How many stories are silenced before they even begin? Maybe it's time we start noticing, start listening, start acknowledging the quiet courage all around us. Because the world doesn't always stop to see us, but it can. And when it does, even for a fleeting moment, it can change everything.